Hi, Dr. Jen. I am so glad that you are on the show with me. I've been waiting for this. You and I
Mm.
have gotten to talk a couple of times, and I think that you're fascinating and full of lots of great advice. You're a source and a wealth of information. So I am certain that the listeners are really going to get a lot out of this. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited about it.
Thank you. I'm glad. I would love for folks just off the bat to understand what it means to be a person that works with parents of mixed kids. So I wonder for you, what makes this unique and what's something that people could really stand to understand about what you do for folks?
You know, it's what makes it unique is that I think in a way I'm not necessarily giving cookie cutter parenting advice, which I know people can find everywhere. I think what I am trying to do is address a very unique experience that a mixed race child has, and a lot of parents either don't realize how rich the experience is, don't realize how to address it. Or if they do think they've addressed it, they realize, oh my gosh, I really haven't gone as much into depth as I could have. So to me, it's more about educating a parent on what is the experience your kid is going to have in the world and how can you better understand that experience, but also then meet your kid where they are so that you can help them navigate that experience.
I really appreciate this because one of the things that I talk about is the fact that being a person who's racially ambiguous or who is mixed race automatically means a different experience. And what's even more complex about it is it's not like there's just a bucket, like, oh, okay, you're mixed, so this is your experience. Because there's so many
Yeah.
complexities even within that. And I'm the parent of mixed race kids, and each of them identifies differently,
Right.
honestly. And it wasn't until much later, actually, until I started doing the work that I do, that I even thought to ask them, actually, how do you
Yeah.
identify? And
Right.
so knowing the complexity even between my own two children, let alone all children who happen to be
Right.
identifying as mixed race.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's super common. Again, that's something that parents don't often even consider is that, wait, my two, three, four children could identify in two, three, four different ways. And you have some famous celebrity examples of that. Like Rashida Jones is an actress, and she talks often about her and her sisters' very different experiences. And I'm not sure if they've talked, I'll be fair and say, I don't know if that they've specifically talked about how they identify, but definitely their own different experiences and how it influences either how they
Mm.
explain themselves to other people, how they view their own like journey through the world. And she's talked often about how she can see my experience was not that of my sisters. Like my people just see me differently. And again, parents don't think that number one, that'll happen. And number two, that they can talk about it, and number three, that they could help their children navigate all of that. Mm. Yeah, so that's why I come in, because it's a very common thing that if you were someone like me that's like familiar with like the nerdy side of all the research of this, and then it's not a surprise to me at all, and I can be able to tell a parent when they have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, this is what you're going to face in a couple years, or here's how you start
Mhm.
talking about blah 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 in your home, because the two kids you have, for example, are very different in appearance, and that means their experiences are going to be very different. But how can you make sure that, number one, they understand this, number two, that they know we both get to claim the same things no matter what our experience is,
Yeah.
and how do we support each other as siblings? Because again, a lot of like, let's say someone like a Rashida Jones starts to become very aware, oh, I might have like a very different set of privileges in the world based on what I look like compared to
Mhm.
my sister, even though we have the exact same parents. So then I have a different kind of responsibility, if you will, or awareness to have and make sure that I either make space for my sister or speak up on behalf of my sister. So it's a unique experience that like a white presenting or a white appearing mixed race person has.
Yeah. Gosh, like two things came up, so I'm trying to like keep my
Well,
brain organized.
I know.
The first thing is, so I had guests on my show 2 seasons ago, maybe, where sisters
Wow.
who came on the very first time they ever talked about their racial identities was on my show.
Oh,
The
wow. And
first
you were like
time.
adult, huh?
Yes, with children, married, living their lives.
My goodness.
And it came out. I'll link for listeners, I'll link that episode in the show notes so they can kind of go back and listen to it. But what was so interesting
Yeah.
was the reason it was the first time. So their mother is a black identifying woman and their father a white identifying man. And their mother just didn't really bring, and I'm doing like air quotes, blackness into
Yeah.
the house. So like all the music was white pop music. There were some exceptions, like Stevie Wonder was allowed, Michael Jackson was allowed, but they weren't what you would think of as black music, right? So absolutely no R&B, no rap, that kind of thing.
Wow.
They didn't really have conversations parent child. So these ladies didn't have conversations sibling to
Right.
sibling either. And
Wow.
so they talked about what it is, and but I've always been aware. So they also had awareness that one of them had lighter skin than the other. Some of
Right.
them had phenotypes that were more, like what someone would call like having white features versus black features, so to
Sure,
speak.
sure.
And so even though they were aware, they never discussed it. Nothing. They also were aware of different treatment, but it was never like conversation.
Yeah.
Do you ever encounter people that they just don't even know where to start, even within family, talking about
Yes.
identity?
All the time. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's very, very common that parents are often just like, I wouldn't even know what to say. I don't even, how do I bring this up? And classic parent situation is that they worry if I bring up something like race or identity, they're kind of approaching it from an adult standpoint because they think, oh, race, identity, those are like really tough topics in adult society and they're fraught with like so much hatred and negativity that if I bring it up to my kid, I'm just gonna like bring them down and scare them and like give them some sort of a complex. But it's like, no, you're not bringing the adult version of like,
Hmm.
conflict that adults deal with online or through politics. Um, you are simply, you are bringing a concrete objective truth to your kid. And then as they get older, you can start presenting them with the problems that society has around these groups of people and this particular unique experience that the kid has. But you don't throw the whole baby out with the bathwater because you're so worried about this complex, heavy topic like race and racism, especially in the history of the United States. I think a lot of
Yeah.
families worry about it even more. But honestly, it is a worldwide thing. Whether it's like countries in Europe or, um, you name it. I've talked with parents that live in Malaysia or Australia, and they're all trying to navigate this. Like, wait, what do I do?
Mhm.
So, you know, race, ethnicity, and then like being more than one race or ethnicity at the same time, that is a like a difficult thing to face for any parent, no matter where they live.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if like I said, if the culture is homogenous, Malaysian or whatever, and you're like, okay, everybody here is understanding what it means to be Malaysian, but how do I help my kid navigate this thing that they are Malaysian and something else, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it's a daunting task for parents, but they don't realize that they can simplify it and make it more like fact, objectively, the truth
Yeah.
to them.
You know, I guess I hadn't thought about the idea of a, being an adult getting in the way.
Yeah.
Like clouding your thought because you're worried and you are so used to, by the time you're an adult, showing up in adult situations or conversations in a certain way and not even realizing actually you don't really even have to make it that big of a deal. Like, but it is a thing. So let's talk about how to talk about it.
Yeah. You give levels. No one goes to a 3-year-old learning the alphabet We don't say, okay, do you know what onomatopoeia is? Let's talk about, blah, blah. You're just like, no, A, B, these are the letters that we have. This is what it looks like. You can practice tracing them if you want. Let's teach you a song. I mean, and then you build on it as they go, then they
Yeah.
get into whenever they start writing essays and all that kind of stuff. Like paragraph is first, and then it's 4 paragraph, so it's the same thing with race and racism. It's the same thing with anything you teach a kid, but
It makes
again, I
absolute
think
sense.
we're so daunted,
Yeah.
because I think parents understand that when it comes to like, okay, I'm not going to throw my kid in the kitchen and say, make a cake. I will
Right.
probably leave them next to me and say, you crack an egg or you do this thing. Or cakes are like you simplify the description of a cake instead of saying, well, the chemical process of yeast causes blah, blah, blah.
If you don't mind me
Yeah.
asking, just realistically, on a
Yeah.
basic level, what could those first conversations sound like?
Oh, to me, there's lots of ways to approach it. Like I have books that I suggest that are, again, because there are multiple people that understand this, not just me.
Sure.
There are children's book authors that are like, you know what? I'm going to help you out, parent. I will simplify the story of race and ethnicity and, racism even. Like there are literal books that explain racism to a little 4-year-old in a way that does not overwhelm them and think, make them scared of the world. But a
Yeah.
great way to start could be just understanding melanin. Like a little kid can grasp that so easily because they're already like as young as 3, a child understands or sees skin color differences.
Yes.
They understand skin color differences. They can see it and they want to know about it. So this is often a concerning topic for parents of mixed race kids because their kid will come up to them and say, why are you that color and I'm this color? And
Oh,
then the
yeah.
parent is like,
Oh,
oh,
God.
it's
They
happening.
noticed. I didn't want them to notice, but now they noticed. What do I do? We
Oh
think
my
somehow they're supposed to go through life and never see that.
God. Right. And so
Yeah.
then the parent's like, oh, I don't know, you're beautiful. I'm beautiful. Everybody's beautiful. And the kid's like, okay, but
Okay.
I don't really get why you're lighter or why am I
Right.
lighter? Like whatever it is. So you might be able to say, oh, you know what? Great question. You're right, huh? I'm this color and you're that color. Let's learn about melanin. And then you teach them what melanin does in the body. And then now you get to go on a walk in the neighborhood and your little 3-year-old is like, they have more melanin. Yes, yes, they do. Oh, that person doesn't have much melanin. No, no, they don't, whatever. And they just grasp that piece of it. And
Yes.
then you can add in as they grow older. Do you know some people are, mean or silly, and they think that if you have more melanin, that's like a not good thing. Can you believe that? Really? Yeah, they do. It's wrong, and you start to lay that baseline framework of there are people in society that don't get skin color is just that, and it doesn't mean anything else.
Right.
They've decided all these bad things about it. I want you to know it, but I'm not teaching you that. We don't believe that. We know the truth.
Yes. I
Yeah.
actually love the idea of starting with the science.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even start with the science as, growing up in a black family. And what's so funny was I was the one with less melanin in my family.
Mm,
um, and it was always confusing to me. And I don't think I started
mm,
having those conversations with my mom until the kids at school started asking me questions about being
mm,
mixed. The other thing I really love about what you explain is, I mean, going back to grown up speak, there's a whole lot of discussion about the approaches to like deal with
yeah.
our history.
Yeah.
And we can't really ignore it. We can't get away from it. And I think that the reason we have such an obsession with race is because there's just never been atoned. Like the wrong that has happened has never
Yeah.
been, there's never been atonement for it.
Right.
While there have been instances, and I won't go into like a whole history lesson, but folks can check this out. I actually encourage people to, like with Japanese internment, there was a full on apology. There were
Yeah.
actually reparations that took place. That's never happened with the black community. And while the black community did receive an apology, I think it came through Congress. It's so
Yeah.
hidden, hardly anybody
Yeah.
knows it even happened,
Right.
and it didn't really change things
Right.
on. And I'm not trying to say there haven't been efforts to change, because I think we can. It would be silly not to recognize that
Sure.
we have made some strides.
Yeah.
But it's also important to recognize that we're living in a time where we could go backwards really quick based on a lot
Mhm.
of the beliefs being expressed. But even starting with children now, from the science of it,
Yeah.
takes away the scary. Then when you get to the part about the mean, silly people,
Yeah.
they already know it's ridiculous because they just know everybody's got melanin. It's just different amounts. So, like,
Exactly.
what's going on? They don't, it
Right.
doesn't have to be something's wrong with me because they don't like me.
Right. 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 It doesn't have to be, oh my gosh, I have the bad skin color. I don't want this
Right.
one. So many mixed race kids, no matter what their background is, they could be, you know, Filipino and white or something, and still be like, I don't like my skin color. I think I need to have that one, because they learn. We just learn in society what the dominant expectation or the beauty standard is,
Yeah.
and literally every kid. Again, I'm saying, I think sometimes, I have a very strong connection to African American community. And so there's like light skin in this community. And sometimes we might meet other people that are like, oh, well, I'm really dark. And they're like Latinx or something. And they might say, well, I'm so dark in my family. We might be like, what? Like, was that what you thought about? Like,
Because relative. Yeah.
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 But then when
Right.
you're, it's like, okay, no, I understood within that circle, so that's why I'm saying no matter what the mixed race kid's background, they understand and learn the message of what is considered dark and that you shouldn't be it. And again, removing some of that weight would be, you can do that through talking about melanin, for example, or one of the other approaches. But I would just say to kind of what you're saying, the argument or the conundrum of whether never to talk about race and erase it all so it all goes away, we really are equal, that colorblind approach, or talking about it and somehow keeping it alive. That's what I get told that a whole bunch
Keeping it
on
alive.
my social media, because of course anybody can comment whatever they want, and they feel free to do so because they're anonymous.
Indeed, they do.
Right. So a lot of people will say, you're keeping racism alive, Dr. Jen, by
By
talking
talking
about it.
about it.
Yeah. So I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, to me, again, because I work in psychology, I work with kids, this is the same argument that people have about teenage pregnancy. There
Ooh,
is a
interesting.
whole,
Okay.
well, there is a whole camp of adults.
The
Around,
abstinence versus talking about
yes,
it, and yet the
but
stats show it's still there.
exactly.
I mean, it's so true what you're saying. I just never made this comparison.
Yeah, the majority of parents are like, just don't ever talk about sex and they won't have it and they won't get pregnant and everything will be fine. And we know that the exact opposite is true. So when you
Right.
don't talk about sex, the kid doesn't learn anything. They don't know how to prepare themselves for sexual experiences. They don't know how to say no. They don't know how to keep themselves safe. And then what happens with all of those things? If you don't know how to keep yourself safe, say no, make the choices, know what to expect, then of course you're much more likely to get pregnant. But when you actually start, you can start very young with kids. Again, this alarms parents, but there
Hmm.
are beautiful books that teach a kid about sex without making it sexual or pornographic. That's
Exactly.
the adult mind saying, oh, if I tell them about sex, no, you're not telling them about sex the way you know it, the way your little nasty mind
There
knows.
you go.
Just kidding. But I remember when I was a kid, I used to babysit. I always tell this story because it shocked me. So here I am, a teenager. I'm babysitting my next door neighbor. He was, sick or something. So he had a book and he's like, oh, I want to read this book. And I'm reading it and I realize as I'm reading it, it's a book that teaching him about, and his parents were educators. So I'm like not surprised that they had all these types of
Yes.
books. But it was it was the most neutral, non-sexual.
Matter of fact.
Yes, and even the bodies in the book were like round, like just they had no shape that would, make you think, ooh, curvy woman and this.
Right. They were just
It was just,
people, just
yeah,
bodies.
they were like super blob, like caricature almost, for a kid, book.
Yeah.
It was like a cartoon blob. And it even showed them in a bed, but the blanket is over them. And I just remember reading like,
Oh my
should I?
God. Am I allowed to? You got some Berenstain Bears or some Dr. Seuss? Like, I don't even know
Yeah,
how to read this.
right. But I remember
Yeah.
going through it in my head being like, that was actually kind of amazing. I'm like, and he was sitting there and he would like giggle at certain parts because it showed like maybe one of the adults in the couple was like getting into the shower and it showed a little butt crack. He's like, I'm like,
Right.
okay, you're still a kid. Got
Right.
it.
That's normal. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was like, oh, way to set the stage. And then when that kid gets a little bit older, when
Yeah.
you bring up, oh, male, female, he's gonna be like, yeah, yeah, I know, I remember. And now you
Yeah.
can add some stuff to it because of their maturity level. So same thing. I mean, if sex is not a fraught topic in the United States,
Oh, yeah.
and it is, and it's, I don't know which is more fraught, race or sex. You know what I'm saying? Like they're like neck and neck, and it depends on who you talk to, who's going to say it's more alarming. But I'm telling you, parents are floored by both. They are just sitting there like,
Yeah.
how the heck do I bring this up? You
You
know?
know, it is a brilliant analogy
Mhm.
because I think that is so true. And let me tell you, I have a story for you too.
Okay.
So, and a lot of the times, even these conversations we're having are uniquely, I don't want to say like purely uniquely American, but it's very American.
Right. Yeah.
So, our family, we lived outside of the US for about 15 years. When we lived in Germany, I was still teaching then, and I taught second grade. And it was a bilingual, bicultural school. So we spoke both English and German. We taught both American and German curriculum. I did not know until it was coming up that in second grade in Germany, that's sex year. And the way the school worked is they would stay with their students from kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. And then when those students moved on to third grade, those teachers started kindergarten again, and they
Okay.
would stay with those students K1, 2.
Right.
So for them, they were like, this is the third year with these kids.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, switch out the stuff, pick it out. Oh, okay, 2 months, we're going to be working on this curriculum. And they start handing me books and folders and things. And I'm like, huh?
Right.
And they're like, oh, gosh, that's right.
Right.
We
Oh,
have an
you know,
American.
again. Yeah.
So first, they sit me down
Okay.
to be like, you got to chill. You got to
Right.
chill because this is actually what it is about. And the kids aren't freaking out. You're freaking out. So
Exactly.
before you do this, we need you to like relax. Then
Mhm.
they hold a conference night for all of the American parents
Wow.
because
Good.
they're like, this is what's about to come. We already know y'all about to freak out. So just relax. Here are all the books, pass them around, look at the materials. These are what the discussions look like. Yes, we do read
Wow.
alouds. Yes, we talk about this. It isn't
Wow.
a big deal. And the parents are like, oh, you can't, what? You, and they're like, you can opt out if you want to, but
Right.
here's the risks, right? Same thing. Think about drinking. Like they're allowed to drink
Yeah.
wine and beer at 16 and they
Yeah.
can drink hard liquor at 18, but they don't drive until they're 18. They can't get a license
Right.
until they're 18. And there's all these other things. So the school's connected, right? All the way
Yeah.
up through high school. I'm walking past lockers and here's this group of teenagers, probably 16, 17, talking about a party. They were not talking about a social party. They were talking about political parties.
Oh,
And I was just like, oh, they make them different here. Like this is
yeah.
completely. These
Yeah.
kids were prepared for life by the time they
Yeah.
graduated, right?
Right.
But I think our culture here in the U.S. we're so afraid. We have so much fear, whether
Yes.
it's about sex, whether it's about drinking, and whether it's about race.
Yep.
We carry so much fear with us. And there, while yes, there are differences and they do experience levels of discrimination, almost always it has to do with immigration or nationality, not actually how you look.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's perfect,
Yeah.
but we don't even get that far because we're so afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of wild when you really look at it, especially like what countries start sex education, for example, way earlier, and then their rates of STDs, it's like it just goes together. And we are the ones that have the highest rates, even though we're supposed to be like the most industrialized and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And we are so behind on so many things when it comes to like preparing children.
Preparing
Um,
them. Yeah.
yeah. So
It's almost like they come ready to be prepared and we ruin it,
yeah,
right?
definitely.
With
I agree with you.
our fears and
Mm.
prudishness, and
Yes.
we carry shame for no reason. Like, why are we ashamed of what we look like? Why are we ashamed of what our
Yes.
bodies do? And
Right.
so, no, what you say, like, I just never made the connection of that
Yeah.
analogy, and it's so true.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, a child comes ready. We're the one that messes it up because they're like, oh, daddy's this and mommy's that and I'm this and why is that? And then the parents are like, don't say
Right.
anything, you know. And then the kid's like, is there something wrong? Oh, something's wrong. Like, oh,
Right.
wait a minute,
Oh, yep.
something wrong with me, you know. And then they're
Now I'm
deducing like,
sad. I'm like,
yeah. Then the kid is
yeah.
like, oh, I brought up something I shouldn't have brought up because now mom is like, what do I say? Oh my gosh, you know. And the kid's like, I
I,
thought this would just be an okay. I thought I could just learn, but now I'm
yeah.
learning much more somehow that
I'm
this
learning
is,
not to ask.
yes, this is an off limits topic, and I don't worry, I won't bring it up again. And now this kid is navigating
Look
race
at
and
that.
identity and mixed race all by themselves because they're like, I don't think my parent can handle it.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, how did you decide to get into this work and to help parents and kids
Yeah. I
in this
mean,
way specifically?
right. I think, you know, this is a little bit more recent, but I have been in the field of psychology, and all of my training in clinical psychology has been with children and adolescents. So I've always worked with them, whether, you know, like I said, in all of my training, all of my fellowships, anything has been focused on working with children and adolescents. And in that process, you are going to interface with parents. Now, I think a classic joke amongst any type of therapist that works with kids is they're sort of like, I love the kids, can't deal with the parents, you know? But that's not really my stance. I think I did a training once where we were required to involve the parent in their child's therapy. They had their own kind of parent session, and it's under a whole framework itself. And so when I worked there, it was like we were required to do this process. And I realized, I was just like, oh my gosh, when you get the parent heavily involved, like, and I mean, a parent has a weekly session just about being a parent. It's not like, let's
Yeah.
dig into your personal life. It's not therapy for them. It's literally, what are you seeing at home? What's difficult for you with this kid? Like, you know, your kid is coming to therapy. What did you struggle with? And you're helping them work through just some of their own perceptions and experiences and approaches, and realizing, hey, that approach is not working because one, two, and three. And you would see so much more progress in that kid when you could just chip away even a little bit at what the parent was
Wow.
doing or perceiving. You know, for me, I would know if I was working with a parent, because of course, the parent's going to be like, don't you tell me, like, oh no, you're going to tell me I'm doing everything wrong. So they're kind of more defensive. But when
Yeah.
you explain something to them and then you see that parent go, oh, like,
Hmm.
I see what I'm doing. You don't have to do anything else. They automatically make the shift. And then the kid is going to respond in kind. And then, you know, again, like I said, you can start to see some progress. You're like, okay, now let's build on this. Like,
Yeah.
now you're starting to get what I'm saying. I'm not against you. I'm helping you break through to meet your kid. And they're like, oh, yeah, yeah, let's talk
Right.
more about it. So that work was going on. That was always happening. And then on the side, I used to kind of keep my world separate, I guess, because I was doing nonprofit work with mixed race organizations. So I was helping, you know, either going to conferences or running seminars or just planning things to raise awareness and advocate for the mixed race experience or interracial couples or transracial adoptees. And at some point, I started to realize, oh, I can merge these two because in the nonprofit space, I was meeting a lot of parents who were raising mixed race kids and they didn't know what to do. And I would sit around with maybe some of the other leaders of this organization, and we'd be like, man, we really need to find some therapists to work with the exactly. I'm like, yeah, I mean, there's hardly any. I've never
Oh my
met one.
gosh.
And then I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck? Like,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah. So that's when I realized that. And so I started my private practice where that became my focus. I'm like, okay, I am the psychologist that you can come to with your mixed race kid or you as a mixed race adult. Like I made that my focus because I didn't see it that much out there. But then I added this like, wait, maybe I can just do coaching because a parent doesn't need therapy to learn how to like meet their kid in this way.
Sure.
I mean, maybe they do, but I would send them, somewhere else. Like, you know what? They don't need therapy. They need education and they need
Yeah.
guidance. And
Yeah.
that's what I can provide. And so that's when I began building all the different facets of it and stuff.
Yeah. Do you think your identity has ever come into play with how you've decided to build out your practice?
I think it is. It definitely is. I mean, my identity on so many different levels impacts how I do what I do. I mean, I've had a very specific experience based on the way that I look. Um, and because I get perceived a certain way, I think that impacts how I interact with other people, how they interact with me. But then it also shifts the way that I interact with parents of mixed race kids because I think um, there might be a classic picture in most people's minds of what a mixed race person is or looks
Yeah.
like. And so then I'm like the first place that a parent gets challenged because they're like, "Oh, you're mixed. Oh, like, oh, I didn't think you were." I'm like, "Yeah, I understand. Like, many people don't because you've been probably fed a particular picture of what it looks like, and most often that's like black, white, and some classic look that might result in, which it doesn't always, but
It's true.
apparently we think it always looks like this one particular picture. Um, so that's one piece of it. But then the second piece is again, because I don't have a white parent, I think that makes my mixed race experience very unique and a little bit on the back burner, meaning if I go into any of these spaces or if I read research, it's often on backgrounds that are not mine. And so I am taking a very observer approach or a very comparative kind of approach because I can read something and be like, oh, yeah, 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 except, oh, that part didn't really apply to me, and so I can take all that in. And so when I'm working with parents, I think it makes me have a stance of the shared mixed race experience because no matter where the person is from, like I said, no matter the country, no matter the background, you can bring 10 mixed race people together and they could
Hmm.
have 10 totally different racial ethnic mixes. But at some point they're going to be like, oh, me too. Oh my God, I hate
Yep.
when this happens. And oh, I've totally been through that. So what I educate and what I provide for parents is based on that. And what I find is the difference is sometimes when parents are going to find their support, maybe on the like random Facebook groups of the world or something,
Yes.
they're often finding either a white other or specifically black white approach. And they're trying to like extrapolate it to their kid, but the perspective is not as universal. And so it's not as universal and sometimes it's not as vetted, if you will, or like not as compared to like the research on this population. And it's
Yes.
more coming from a stance of
Lived
either I'm
experience.
black or yeah, I'm black or I'm white or I am both. And here's what I think, or here's what you need to watch out for. Here's what you shouldn't do. But it's not really telling I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not painting this like, look, here is a baseline thing of where all of this comes from. It's not a black white thing. It is a mixed race experience. And I try to give that like baseline that ties everything together. And I
Yeah.
think that's why I end up being able to work with a lot of parents because at first they might be tentative, like, oh, well, can my kid come? And then they realize,
Oh,
oh, you're talking about it so generally that I can say, I did go through that. They just
yeah.
said it a little different to me, yeah.
I'm so glad to hear you say this because it gives me some validation with the research that I do, which is
Mhm.
with adults in workplaces. But what are adults? They used to be kids and they grew up, right? So
Right.
these things aren't changing
Exactly.
in terms of those lived experiences. So one, it's interesting as you talk about people trying to sort of perceive your identity and being like, I don't know, like, are you credible? They
Right.
have to trust that you know what you're talking about, not having a white parent. And why I say that is because I'm not biracial, but I
Yeah.
have mixed racial ancestry. I don't know what it's like to have a white parent, but
Yeah.
I'm often assumed to be black white mix. People react to me in a very similar way that they react to black white or white
Uh-huh.
black mixed people,
Gotcha.
because they make that assumption.
Yeah.
But I don't come with the built in, here are the two worlds I'm living in
Yeah.
piece. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. The second thing is it all plays out differently in the workplace. The surveys and the interviews that I've conducted, there are people that are like, I don't see a problem. I don't know what anybody's talking about. But usually they're not what I call MPOC, which is multiracial people of color, meaning both of their
Okay.
parents are people of color.
Okay.
And so, but what they do have in common probably matches what you have seen as this sort of
Mhm.
baseline, which is feeling like you're straddling worlds, feeling insecure as if there's like I'm not enough of this or that, and
Mhm.
learning how to embrace I'm this and that, not this or
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Um, and this idea of liminality or fluidity, like sometimes I feel more this and sometimes I feel that,
Right.
and people not understanding. I also work with companies through diversity, equity, inclusion principles, and
Okay.
by applying them, right? And so it's like, great, you have your employee resource groups or affinity groups, but we have people that feel like they can't go
Yeah.
because they're not black enough or Asian enough or
Right.
whatever, fill in the blank enough. What about an ERG for people who have mixed racial experiences that can
Yeah.
come together and talk
Yeah.
about those common things? And
Right.
so I love that you said it because I think unless you come from this space, it would be really easy to overlook
Yeah.
because we are so used to, we being monoracial folks, looking through a specific lens, also the lenses that have been provided to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And so
So,
it's about, to me, it's, at least with working with parents, it's challenging those lenses. Maybe not challenging, but just expanding the little viewpoint. So kind of scrolling out so like their picture
yeah.
gets bigger and bigger. And they could be like, oh, wait a minute. I was so pinpointed on this one thing.
Yep.
And they don't often know how to expand their lens. So they kind of have blind spots when it comes to their mixed race kids. And that means that's for parents who are monoracial or parents who are mixed race, because even a parent who is mixed race and lived that experience, yes, they are going to be, their lens is a little bit more open because they're like, okay, I know how the world treated me, or but they many times haven't navigated through all their own stuff yet. But then they have
Hmm.
this extra piece of like, oh, wait, my kid is still not going to have the same experience as me because they have a different other parent. So then they're still kind of starting from scratch, like,
Wow.
oh no, what is it? I didn't think about that. Or I thought I would be like, I got this. I know how to talk to my kid. Then they're like,
Yeah.
oh wait, but I don't know. Yeah. So it's,
That's an important assumption to challenge, right? Like I hadn't even considered that either. I do
hmm
talk about what I call it opening your aperture and increasing
right.
your depth of field, right? Like it's because you're right. We do sort of focus and mess it up. We do sort of focus in and um, miss a whole lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
And challenging those assumptions is always a good practice. And so, yeah, see, you taught me so much already today.
Yeah.
What is something that you want all parents to know, regardless of race, about how children learn to see themselves as they're developing?
I mean that they really do not have the information. Like I would want parents to really understand
That the parents don't have the information or that the kids don't have the
the
information?
kids don't.
Mm,
That the kids do not have any info. They are really literally starting from scratch. Like again, going back to my cake example,
yeah.
there is a child in the world that is 7 and still has not seen a cake, let's say, depending on where they live. So it's just, I mean, you introducing stuff, you as a parent are the one that gets to like
Yeah.
provide their first exposure to so much stuff. because the kid just, they literally did not know. They've only been living for 4 years, you know?
Right.
So why do we
It's so
expect them to
true.
know like past presidencies and the history of racism? It's like, no, did you know that there's a color yellow? And the kid's like, what?
Right.
Yellow?
Right. Then
Yeah.
blow their mind when they learn there's a goldenrod.
Exactly right. You're like,
I
what?
know.
Yeah.
We take so many things for granted based on our
Yeah.
own lived
Yeah.
experiences.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah, we just make these mental models where we, if we're not careful, close
Yeah.
ourselves off. Like I met a kid a few summers ago. We went to some friend's house for Fourth of July
Yeah.
celebration, and the child had never seen lightning bugs. And so they were like, so like, oh my
Yeah.
God, these are bugs and they light up. And so I can be like,
Yeah.
yeah, let me tell you, you can catch them and we're holding them and all of
Right.
that stuff. But, when I was growing up in Alaska, there were no lightning bugs up there either. I
Right.
happened to visit family in what we
Right.
called then the lower 48 and
Uh-huh.
whether they were called fireflies or lightning bugs.
Yeah.
And so it was, I learned about my assumptions of what kids should know or we think everybody knows. And
Yeah.
so I had a second chance, thanks universe, to
Mhm.
talk to this child and then actually help like explore the world with them in
Yeah.
this way through the lightning bugs. But
Yeah.
I just yeah, how much more rich could we or how much more richness could we provide for our children if we could
Yeah.
sort of I don't want to say, I don't know even how to say this, Dr. Jen, but like clean our own slates off a little bit. So
Yeah.
we got too many assumption, like too much assumption
Yes.
junk that
Right.
gets in the way.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's often like a beginning place I try to go with parents is helping them kind of see their own experience, see their own perspective first, and then see where that might have made some blind spots when it comes to their child's experience. Not, it's just
Yeah.
not in a bad way. It's just like you have to know where you started and where you're kind of coming into this raising of your mixed kid. Like, where are you coming from? What views and values are you bringing into
Right.
the table that you may not have ever evaluated?
Yeah.
And maybe some we challenge, but maybe some we keep. You know what I mean? But you got to know what they are.
Yeah. Makes total sense. Well,
Yeah.
I know we're going to close really soon. So I just want to ask you one more question. All of us start somewhere. I'm wondering over the time that you've worked with families and children and your practice in general, what's something very valuable that you have learned as a practitioner?
Mm. The one that comes to mind now, let's see, because I'm sure I could come up with many, but the one that's coming to mind now is just how much we underestimate the depth and complexity of thought that young children and adolescents have. You know, there is a certain way that kids and teens may learn to like speak and interact with their parents again because they it's based off of, well, you normally don't like to talk about this, or, oh, you don't really spend too much time listening. You're going to tell me how to fix it anyway, so I'll just give you the short version. But when they are outside of that kind of dynamic, it's amazing what, 8-year-olds think or what 13-year-olds think and how much they're aware. I mean, I've sat with 13-year-olds who the parents are like, she's so mature. She doesn't do this. She's lazy. She shouldn't have her phone. She da 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 da. And then that kid is in therapy crying like, my mother went through so much. And it's like, I can't help you with that. And I'm trying to do, but you're pushing me and I'm asking you, just give me some time to think about it. I'm like, this is
Wow.
so insightful. Like, and she would never feel comfortable to say that to the parent because of the dynamic they have. And I'm like, she's been, you know, this kid or many others have been like thinking on a deeper level that like I said, I just don't think, I think people underestimate how deep and how complex their like evaluation of themselves and their world and the parents that are raising them.
Mm.
I've never met a kid that does not have their own like breakdown of what's going on for their parent. The same way that the parents like, let me tell you about my kid. The kids are like, okay, let me tell you about my mom.
I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My son sent me a TikTok once. It was super sweet.
Yeah.
So I opened it up and it was really short. It was this maybe 18, 19 or early 20s something person that was like, I had to realize that my mom or dad or whomever,
Yeah.
my parent is learning how to be a parent as they're parenting.
Right.
Like, this is the first time they're doing this too. Like, even
Mm-hmm.
if you have more than one child,
Yep.
parenting more than one child is the first time you've parented more than one child.
Yeah.
Like, so everything is a first. And so I was like, oh my God. So here's this young adult realizing, yeah, my
Mm-hmm.
parents are people and going through
Mm-hmm.
new things just like I'm going through new things, and to be able to extend to them grace. And I
Yeah.
was like, wow. Well, it
Right.
felt good for my kid to see me,
Yeah.
or to see
Yeah.
us, as parents, to be like, I get it.
Yeah.
You're learning too, just as
Yeah.
I'm learning. But yet, as parents, and I say this as well to leaders,
Uh-huh.
there's something about getting a title, whether it's the title of now I'm a parent or now I'm a manager or now I'm a whatever, that makes us somehow think we're supposed to suddenly know everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how could we make mistakes? We're supposed to know
Right.
everything now. And
Right.
so
Right.
to also give ourselves some grace as we're learning. So
Yeah.
listen,
Yeah.
I am not disappointed. I am not surprised. This has been a good conversation, and
Yeah.
you bring a richness, I think, to this space. So appreciate you. And
Thank
where
you.
can folks find you? I know you're on the social medias in
Yeah.
places. Um,
Yeah, I am on social media. I think the main place I tend to go the most is Instagram. So my handle there is Dr. Jenn Psych. It's DRJENN, two N's, and then PSYCH. And then, of course, my website is freetobecollective.com. That's the name of my organization. So I think those are probably the best places to find me.
Fantastic. Well, I'll link everything in the show notes for folks. So, any additional thoughts or questions you have for me before we close?
No, I think this is it. I think it was such a very fun discussion, but, you know, um,
Thank you. I did too, and I just really appreciate the work you do, and I'm
Absolutely.
certain that the listeners will too. So, thank you, Dr. Jen.
Thank you. Thank you. Same to you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay.
Whew.